In a small, cozy town surrounded by rolling hills and lush greenery, life moved at a predictable pace. Everyone knew each other's names, their habits, and even the little quirks that made them unique. It was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen, until one day when everything changed. The change came in the form of Clara, a young girl who arrived in town with her aunt. She was different from anyone else they had ever met. For starters, Clara couldn't see. Her world was shrouded in darkness, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that intrigued some and unnerved others. Always by her side was an old violin case, its surface scratched and worn from years of use. It looked like it had traveled through time itself, yet Clara treated it as though it were a priceless treasure. Clara's story wasn't easy. She had lost both her parents in a car accident just months earlier, leaving her orphaned and heartbroken. Her aunt, a warm-hearted woman named Mrs. Harper, decided to take Clara under her wing and give her a fresh start in this sleepy little town. They moved into a modest house on Maple Street right next to the bakery whose aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air every morning. But Clara's arrival didn't go unnoticed. Whispers rippled through the community as people tried to make sense of this new face. Some felt sympathy for the blind girl who had suffered so much loss. Others were curious about how she would adapt to such a small, tight-knit environment. However, not everyone was kind or understanding. At school, Clara quickly became the center of attention, but not in the way she might have hoped. On her very first day, she walked hesitantly down the hallway, clutching her white cane as if it were her lifeline. The sound of her careful footsteps echoed against the tiled floor, drawing stares from students who had never seen anyone like her before. Most kept their distance, unsure of what to say or do. But there was one person who didn't hold back: Ethan. Ethan was known around school as the pioneer of mischief. He wasn't the smartest student, nor was he particularly talented at anything, but he had a knack for stirring up trouble wherever he went. His sharp tongue and quick wit made him popular among certain circles, though many secretly disliked him. When he saw Clara struggling to find her way to class, something inside him twisted. Instead of offering help, he smirked and leaned over. To his friends, "Look at this," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "She's carrying a stick bigger than she is. What's she gonna do, poke us to death?" His friends erupted into laughter, joining in on the cruel joke. Clara flinched but said nothing, focusing instead on finding her classroom door. Things only got worse from there. Over the next few days, Ethan took every opportunity to mock Clara. He mimicked her cautious movements in the cafeteria, exaggerating her steps until they looked ridiculous. During recess, he called her names like Miss Blindfold and Can't See Clara. Once he even grabbed her violin case while she was eating lunch, holding it high above his head as though it were a trophy. Clara reached out desperately, her hands trembling as she tried to locate the source of the teasing. "Give it back," she pleaded softly, her voice barely audible over the din of the crowded cafeteria. But Ethan only grinned wider, spinning around to keep the case just out of reach. A few students glanced away guiltily, unwilling to intervene. Others laughed along nervously, afraid of becoming Ethan's next target. Only when a teacher finally intervened did Ethan reluctantly return the case, muttering something under his breath about making a joke. Despite the constant bullying, Clara refused to let Ethan break her spirit. Every morning she woke up early, dressed neatly, and headed to school with her head held high. She participated in class discussions, answered questions thoughtfully, and always greeted people with a polite smile. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the whispers or the occasional jibe aimed her way. What no one realized, however, was that Clara had a secret, one that she guarded closely. Inside that battered old violin case lay more than just an instrument. It held her dreams, her memories, and her connection to the world. Music was her refuge, the one thing that allowed her to express emotions words could never capture. And though she rarely spoke about it, Clara practiced tirelessly at home, letting the melodies flow freely from her fingertips. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his relentless teasing, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. To him, Clara was an easy target. a vulnerable girl who wouldn't fight back. But deep down, he failed to see the strength hidden within her silence. Little did he know, his actions were about to lead to a moment that would change not only Clara's life, but his own as well. As the weeks passed, tension grew thicker in the hallways. Students began to notice subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Some admired Clara's resilience, wondering how she managed to stay so composed despite the constant harassment. Others grew tired of Ethan's antics, feeling uneasy about laughing along with his jokes, yet no one dared to step forward, not yet. Then came the day that would alter everything: music class. It was a subject Ethan openly despised, often complaining about how boring and pointless it was. But this particular lesson turned out to be anything but ordinary. As the teacher handed out sheet music and instructed everyone to practice, Ethan spotted Clara sitting quietly in the corner, her violin case resting beside her. An idea sparked in his mind, and before long, he was leaning across the room with a sly grin. "Hey, Clara," he called out, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "You carry that thing everywhere. How about you show us what you've got? Or are you too scared to play?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Clara, waiting to see how she would respond. Would she shrink back, as she had done so many times before? Or would she rise to the challenge? What happened next would leave everyone speechless and force Ethan to confront the consequences of his cruelty. The day started like any other in the small-town school, with students filing into classrooms and settling into their usual routines. But as the clock ticked closer to music class, an uneasy tension lingered in the air. Ethan had been unusually quiet during lunch, a mischievous glint in his eyes hinting at something brewing. No one paid much attention. After all, Ethan was always up to something, but Clara seemed to sense it too. She sat quietly in her seat, clutching her violin case tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. When the bell rang for music class, everyone shuffled into the room, dragging chairs across the floor and chatting noisily. The teacher, Mr. Peterson, stood at the front of the room, trying to bring order to the chaos. He was a kind man with a deep love for music, but even he struggled to keep the rowdy group focused. As he began explaining the lesson, Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking bored out of his mind. His gaze wandered around the room until it landed on Clara. Clara sat near the corner, her posture straight and composed as always. She had placed her violin case carefully on the desk beside her, running her fingers lightly over its surface as if reassuring herself it was still there. Ethan smirked. To him, that old, battered case was nothing more than a prop, a symbol of weakness he could exploit. And today, he decided, would be the perfect opportunity to push her further than ever before. "All right, class," Mr. Peterson announced, clapping his hands together. "Today we're going to focus on individual practice. I want each of you to take your instrument or borrow one from the supply closet and work on improving your skills. If anyone needs help, feel free to ask." As the students scrambled to grab instruments or set up their sheet music, Ethan turned toward Clara. With a sly grin, he raised his hand. "Mr. Peterson," he called out loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "What about Clara? She brings that thing everywhere. Is she actually going to play, or is it just for show?" The room went silent. All eyes shifted between Ethan and Clara, waiting to see what would happen next. Clara froze, her fingers pausing mid-motion on the violin case. For a moment, she looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. The weight of everyone's stares pressed down on her, making her feel smaller than she already did. But then slowly, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Well?" Ethan pressed, his tone dripping with mockery. "Are you going to prove you can actually do something, or are you just pretending?" Clara didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, without saying a word, she reached for the latches on her violin case and opened it gently. Inside lay her violin, polished to a soft shine despite its age. Its strings gleamed faintly under the classroom lights, and the bow rested neatly beside it, ready to be used. Clara ran her fingers along the edge of the instrument, feeling its familiar curves and grooves. This violin wasn't just an object. To her, it was a part of who she was. Ethan watched her intently, his smirk widening. "Oh, so you really are going to try? Good luck with that," he sneered, earning a few nervous chuckles from his friends. But Clara ignored him. Carefully, she lifted the violin and positioned it under her chin, adjusting the angle until it felt just right. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and precise, as though she had done this 1,000 times before, which, in fact, she had. The rest of the class watched in stunned silence. Even Mr. Peterson stopped writing on the board and turned to observe. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of Clara's chair as she adjusted her posture. For a brief moment, it felt as though time itself had frozen, leaving everyone suspended in anticipation. Finally, Clara raised her bow and touched it lightly to the strings. At first, the note that emerged was hesitant, almost shy, as if testing the waters. It wavered slightly, trembling in the air like a fragile bird taking flight. But then, something remarkable happened. Clara closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. Slowly, steadily, the notes grew stronger, weaving together into a melody that seemed to come alive in the room. It wasn't perfection, at least not in the technical sense. There were moments where the pitch faltered or the rhythm stumbled, but none of that mattered. What poured out of Clara's violin was raw emotion, pure and unfiltered. It was as if every ounce of pain, frustration, and resilience she had ever felt was being channeled into the music. Each note carried a story, painting vivid images in the minds of those listening. Tears welled up in some students' eyes as they realized the depth of what they were hearing. Others sat motionless, their jaws slack with awe. Even Mr. Peterson, who had taught music for decades, found himself captivated by the sheer beauty of Clara's performance. He had never expected such power to come from someone so young, and especially not from someone who couldn't see. Ethan, however, was the most affected. His initial smugness vanished almost instantly, replaced by a mixture of shock and guilt. He had expected Clara to fail miserably, to crumble under the pressure of his taunts. Instead, she had risen above them, proving herself in a way words never could. As the music washed over him, Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. For the first time, he truly understood the harm his actions had caused, not just to Clara, but to himself as well. By the time Clara finished playing, the entire room was spellbound. The final note hung in the air for several seconds before fading into silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, as if waking from a trance, the class erupted into applause. Cheers filled the room, and several students jumped to their feet, clapping wildly. Clara lowered her violin, her expression unreadable. She hadn't played to impress anyone. She had simply followed her heart. But now, faced with the overwhelming response, she allowed herself a small, tentative smile. Amidst the celebration, Ethan remained seated, his hands resting limply in his lap. His face burned with shame as he replayed the events in his mind. How could he have been so cruel? How could he have underestimated her so completely? The answers eluded him, but one thing was clear. Clara had changed something inside him. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, her music had struck a chord deeper than any insult or joke ever could. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the students reluctantly gathered their things and headed for the door. Clara packed her violin carefully, her movements calm and unhurried. Before leaving, she paused briefly, turning her head slightly in Ethan's direction. Though she couldn't see him, her presence alone was enough to make him squirm uncomfortably. For the rest of the day, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Clara's performance. It replayed in his mind over and over again, haunting him with its beauty and intensity. He knew he couldn't undo what he had done, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to make things right. Little did he know, this single moment would set off a chain reaction, leading to changes none of them could have anticipated. The days following Clara's unforgettable performance in music class felt different. The air in the school seemed lighter, charged with an energy that hadn't been there before. Word of her incredible talent spread like wildfire, and soon everyone, from teachers to students, was talking about the blind girl who played the violin with such soul-stirring emotion. For Clara, life began to shift in ways she hadn't imagined. At first, the attention was overwhelming. People who had once ignored her or laughed along with Ethan's cruel jokes now approached her in the hallways, eager to ask questions or simply compliment her playing. Some wanted to know how she managed to play without being able to see the strings. Others marveled at the depth of feeling in her music, wondering if she composed her own pieces. Clara answered their questions patiently, explaining that she relied on touch and memory to navigate the violin, and that her music came from her heart rather than any formal training. Despite the newfound interest, Clara remained humble. She didn't seek out praise or attention. Instead, she continued going about her daily routine as quietly as ever. But something inside her had shifted too. Playing in front of the class had given her a sense of confidence she hadn't felt before. It wasn't just about proving herself, it was about connecting with others through her music. And slowly but surely she began to let people in. Meanwhile, Ethan wrestled with his emotions. He couldn't stop thinking about Clara's performance, or the look on her face when she finished playing. There had been no anger, no resentment, nothing to suggest she held a grudge against him for all the times he'd mocked her. Instead, she had smiled softly, almost graciously, as though forgiving him without needing to say a word. That quiet acceptance gnawed at Ethan more than anything else could have. He tried to brush it off at first, telling himself it didn't matter. "It's just music," he muttered under his breath one afternoon while walking home. "Big deal." But deep down he knew better. Clara's song had reached a part of him he hadn't known existed, a part that recognized pain and vulnerability, not just in others but in himself. The guilt weighed heavily on his chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. One evening, unable to ignore his conscience any longer, Ethan found himself standing outside the library where Clara often practiced, after school. He hesitated for a long moment, staring at the door as if debating whether to turn back. What would he even say to her? How could he possibly make up for everything he'd done? Finally, gathering his courage, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sound of Clara's violin greeted him immediately, filling the room with a gentle, lilting melody. She sat near the window, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Her movements were fluid and graceful, her fingers dancing across the strings with practiced ease. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. When the final note faded into silence, Clara lowered her violin and turned her head slightly in his direction. "Ethan?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with surprise. "Is that you?" For a moment, Ethan panicked. Had she heard him coming? Could she somehow sense his presence? Then he realized she must have recognized the sound of his footsteps. He was notorious for clomping around loudly in his sneakers. Clearing his throat awkwardly, he stepped closer. Yeah, it's me." Clara tilted her head, waiting for him to continue. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Ethan shifted from one foot to the other, fumbling for words. I wanted to say something. About the other day. In music class." Clara nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Go on," she said simply. "I'm sorry," Ethan blurted out, the words tumbling out faster than he intended. "For everything. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. It was wrong, and I feel like garbage for doing it." To his relief, Clara didn't lash out or demand an explanation. Instead, she gave him a small, understanding smile. "Thank you for apologizing," she said. "It means a lot." "But why aren't you mad?" Ethan asked, genuinely puzzled. "After everything I did to you, you should hate me." Clara shook her head. "Hating someone doesn't fix anything," she replied gently. "I know you were trying to get a reaction out of me because, well, maybe you thought it would make you feel better about yourself. But hurting me wouldn't have changed how you feel inside. Trust me, I've been hurt enough to know." Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had never thought about it that way before. All this time, he had been so focused on teasing Clara and making himself look tough that he hadn't stopped to consider why he felt the need to do it in the first place. Was it insecurity? Loneliness? A desperate attempt to fit in? Whatever the reason, hearing Clara put it into perspective made him feel both ashamed and strangely grateful. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Ethan admitted, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "But I want to make things right. If there's anything I can do." Clara thought for a moment, then gestured toward the chair beside her. "Sit down," she said, "and listen." Confused but curious, Ethan obeyed. Clara picked up her violin again and began to play, weaving together a soft, haunting melody. As the notes filled the room, Ethan closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Each note carried a weight, a story, a piece of Clara's soul. By the time she finished, tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. "That was amazing," he whispered hoarsely. "How do you do that? Make people feel so much?" "It's not about technique," Clara explained. "It's about honesty. When I play, I let myself feel whatever is in my heart. Sadness, joy, anger, hope. And I share it with whoever is listening. Music has a way of connecting us in ways words can't." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing her words. For the first time, he understood why Clara's performance had affected him so deeply. It wasn't just her skill, it was the raw honesty behind it, the willingness to be vulnerable even after everything she had endured. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made a conscious effort to change. He stopped teasing classmates and started paying attention to how his actions impacted others. At first it was awkward. He wasn't used to being kind or thoughtful, but the more he practiced, the easier it became. Surprisingly, Clara played a big role in helping him along the way. She invited him to sit in during her practice sessions, teaching him the basics of the violin and encouraging him to try playing himself. Though Ethan struggled at first, his fingers clumsy and uncoordinated, he found solace in the process. It was frustrating, yes, but also rewarding in a way he hadn't expected. Each time he coaxed a clear note from the strings, he felt a spark of pride. More importantly, he felt connected to Clara, not as a bully, but as a friend. Their unlikely bond grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan began attending local events where Clara performed, cheering her on enthusiastically. He even helped organize a fundraiser to buy new instruments for the school's music program, dedicating it to Clara's late parents. Though he still had moments of doubt and self-criticism, he knew he was moving in the right direction. As for Clara, she continued to inspire those around her. Her performances became a staple of community gatherings, drawing crowds from neighboring towns. Yet despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded, always reminding people that her journey wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about sharing her love of music and showing others that disability didn't define her. It was just one part of who she was. Through it all, Ethan stood by her side, determined to support her dreams while learning from her example. What had started as a toxic dynamic born out of cruelty had transformed into a friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. Neither of them could have predicted how far they would come. But looking back, they realized it was the music that had brought them together. And in its own quiet, powerful way, it had changed their lives forever. The transformation in Ethan was gradual but undeniable. At first, it seemed like a fleeting phase, just another attempt to blend in or avoid trouble. But as the weeks turned into months, those around him began to notice real changes. The boy, who had once thrived on chaos and cruelty, now showed glimpses of kindness, empathy, and even humility. And while some dismissed it as an act, others saw it for what it truly was: redemption. Ethan's newfound friendship with Clara became the cornerstone of his transformation. They weren't inseparable by any means. He still spent time with his old group of friends, though their antics no longer appealed to him. But there was a quiet bond between them that grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about understanding, acceptance, and growth. For Ethan, spending time with Clara forced him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. For Clara, it gave her a chance to see beyond the bully she had once feared. One afternoon after school, Ethan found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor of Clara's living room, clumsily attempting to hold a violin under his chin. Mrs. Harper, Clara's aunt, watched from the doorway with an amused smile as Ethan grimaced at the awkward angle. "This thing is impossible," he groaned, lowering the instrument with a sigh. "How do you even make it sound good?" Clara chuckled softly, adjusting his grip on the bow. "It takes practice," she said, her tone patient but firm. "You don't expect to run a marathon without training first, right? Same goes for this." Ethan rolled his eyes but didn't argue. He had come to accept that Clara wasn't one to sugarcoat things, and oddly enough, he appreciated her honesty. Over the past few weeks, she had taught him the basics of playing the violin, how to position his hands, how to draw the bow across the strings, and most importantly, how to listen. Not just to the notes, but to the emotions behind them. "You're doing better than you think," Clara encouraged, tilting her head as if trying to gauge his progress. "Try again. Just focus on making one clear note." Ethan hesitated, then raised the violin once more. His fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the strings, unsure of where to press. Finally, he took a deep breath and drew the bow across the instrument. The resulting sound was scratchy and uneven, far from perfect, but it was a start. Clara clapped lightly, her face lighting up with approval. "See?" she said. "Not bad for someone who thought violins were stupid." Ethan grinned sheepishly, scratching the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, maybe I was wrong about that." Their shared moments like these became a regular part of their routine. Whether it was practicing music, working on school projects, or simply talking about life, Ethan found himself drawn to Clara's calm presence and unwavering positivity. She never lectured him or reminded him of his past mistakes. Instead, she treated him with the same kindness she extended to everyone else. That simple act of grace meant more to Ethan than he could put into words. But Ethan's journey wasn't just about personal growth. It was also about repairing the damage he had caused. Slowly, but surely, he began reaching out to the people he had hurt before. One day during lunch, he approached Mia, a shy girl who often sat alone because Ethan and his friends had teased her mercilessly in the past. "Hey, Mia," he said, awkwardly, sliding into the seat across from her. "Can we talk for a sec?" Mia looked up, startled. Her initial reaction was suspicion. Ethan's sudden appearance felt too good to be true. But when he apologized sincerely for his behavior and asked if they could start fresh, she softened. By the end of the conversation, they were laughing together over a shared memory from class. It was a small victory, but for Ethan it felt monumental. Word of Ethan's efforts spread quickly through the school. Some students remained skeptical, convinced that his change of heart was temporary. Others, however, admired his willingness to admit fault and make amends. Even teachers noticed the shift, praising him for taking responsibility for his actions. Mr. Peterson, the music teacher, went so far as to invite Ethan to join the school orchestra, a suggestion that left the entire class stunned. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Ethan admitted when Mr. Peterson made the offer. "I mean, I can barely play a single note without messing it up." "That's why we practice," Mr. Peterson replied with a warm smile. "Music isn't about perfection, Ethan. It's about connection. And based on what I've seen lately, you've got plenty of potential." Encouraged by Clara and Mr. Peterson, Ethan decided to give it a try. Joining the orchestra was daunting, especially since many of his peers still viewed him as the class troublemaker. But with Clara's support, and her occasional teasing about his musical disasters, he slowly began to find his rhythm. Each rehearsal brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. By the time the winter concert rolled around, Ethan stood proudly alongside his classmates, holding his violin with confidence. Back in the community, Clara continued to shine. Her performances became a source of inspiration for people of all ages. From intimate gatherings at the local library to larger events at the town hall, her music touched hearts and sparked conversations about resilience, inclusion, and the power of art. Parents praised her courage, children looked up to her as a role model, and even strangers reached out to express how much her story had impacted them. Ethan played a key role in amplifying Clara's message. Inspired by her example, he organized a series of fundraisers aimed at supporting disabled individuals in the community. The first event, a talent showcase featuring students from the school, raised enough money to purchase adaptive instruments for the music program. Another initiative focused on creating a sensory-friendly space at the community center, complete with braille books, tactile games, and calming activities designed for people with disabilities. Though Ethan still struggled with self-doubt, he found strength in knowing he was making a difference. Every time someone thanked him for his efforts, he felt a surge of pride, not because he craved recognition, but because he knew he was helping to build a kinder, more inclusive world. And every time Clara smiled at him during rehearsals or performances, he felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. As the school year drew to a close, preparations for the annual spring gala were underway. The event was a highlight of the community calendar, featuring performances, auctions, and awards celebrating student achievements. This year, however, there was an added twist. Clara had been chosen as the guest of honor, with a special tribute planned to recognize her contributions to the town. When Ethan heard the news, he immediately volunteered to help organize the tribute. Working alongside Mrs. Harper and several teachers, he poured his energy into ensuring every detail was perfect, from arranging the stage setup to coordinating the audio equipment. On the night of the gala, as Clara stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause, Ethan stood backstage watching with a lump in his throat. Clara's performance that evening was nothing short of magical. She played a piece she had composed herself, inspired by her journey of healing and hope. The melody soared and dipped, capturing both the pain of loss and the joy of discovery. When she finished, the audience erupted into cheers, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Tears streamed down faces, including Ethan's, as he realized how far they had all come. After the performance, Clara addressed the crowd, thanking them for their support and reminding everyone of the importance of embracing differences. "We all have struggles," she said, her voice steady and strong. "But those struggles don't define us, they shape us. And when we choose to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down, we create something beautiful." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, but none more so than Ethan. As he stood there, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors, he knew he had found his purpose. What had started as a tale of bullying and cruelty had transformed into a story of redemption, resilience, and unity. And at the heart of it all was Clara, a blind girl with a gift for music and a spirit that refused to be broken. For Ethan, the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be moments of doubt, setbacks, and challenges to overcome. But with Clara by his side, and the lessons she had taught him firmly etched in his mind, he was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had proven that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter tomorrows. All it took was a little courage, a lot of forgiveness, and the belief that change was possible. As the final weeks of the school year approached, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia filled the air. For Clara, this period marked not just the end of another chapter in her life, but also the beginning of a new adventure. She had been accepted into a prestigious conservatory for music, a dream she had nurtured quietly for years. The opportunity was both thrilling and daunting, as it meant leaving behind the town that had become her second home and the people who had supported her through thick and thin. Ethan, too, felt conflicted about Clara's departure. Over the months, their friendship had grown into something neither of them could have anticipated. What began as an apology and a tentative truce had blossomed into a deep bond built on trust, respect, and mutual growth. Ethan had come to rely on Clara's wisdom and encouragement, especially during moments when self-doubt threatened to pull him back into old habits. Now, with her leaving, he worried about losing the anchor that had kept him grounded. The day before Clara's farewell concert, Ethan found himself pacing nervously outside her house. He had spent hours trying to figure out how to properly say goodbye, but no words seemed adequate. Finally, taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. Mrs. Harper answered with a warm smile, ushering him inside. "Clara's upstairs practicing," she said softly, gesturing toward the staircase. "You can go join her." When Ethan entered Clara's room, he found her sitting by the window, her violin resting gently on her lap. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting golden hues across her face. She looked up as he entered, a small smile playing on her lips. "Hey, Ethan," she said, "I thought you might stop by today." I, Ethan stammered, suddenly at a loss for words. He hadn't planned what to say, and now his mind felt blank. "I just wanted to see you before everything changes." Clara nodded knowingly. "Change is hard," she admitted, "but it's also necessary. I wouldn't have gotten this far without embracing it." Ethan sank onto the chair beside her, letting out a heavy sigh. "I don't know what I'm going to do without you here," he confessed. "You've helped me so much, more than you probably realize. I'm scared I'll mess things up again once you're gone." Clara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was light yet reassuring. "Ethan, you've already proven that you're capable of change. You didn't need me to tell you right from wrong. You figured it out yourself. All I did was remind you that you're stronger than your mistakes." Her words struck a chord deep within him. It was true. He had taken ownership of his actions and worked tirelessly to make amends. But hearing Clara acknowledge his efforts gave him a renewed sense of confidence. "Still," he said, managing a weak smile, "it won't be the same without you around." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of impending goodbyes hanging between them. Eventually, Clara picked up her violin and began to play. The melody was soft and melancholic, capturing the essence of their shared journey. The struggles, the triumphs, and the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. In that moment, he realized that Clara's legacy wasn't confined to her performances or accolades. It was woven into the lives she had touched, including his own. The following evening, the entire town gathered at the community center for Clara's farewell concert. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as families, friends, and neighbors filed in, eager to celebrate the girl who had inspired them all. Banners adorned the walls, bearing messages like, "We'll miss you, Clara," and "Thank you for sharing your light." Ethan stood near the front row, fidgeting nervously as he waited for the show to begin. When Clara finally walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, she carried herself with quiet grace, her white cane clicking softly against the floor. As she settled into her seat and adjusted her violin, the room fell silent, anticipation crackling in the air. Then, with a deep breath, she began to play. The piece she chose was one she had composed specifically for this occasion, a tribute to her parents, her aunt, her friends, and the town that had welcomed her with open arms. The melody started slow and tender, evoking memories of love and loss. Gradually, it swelled into a powerful crescendo, symbolizing hope, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. By the time she reached the final note, tears were streaming down countless faces, including Ethan's. When the last echoes faded away, the audience leapt to their feet, cheering and clapping wildly. Clara lowered her violin, her expression serene, despite the overwhelming emotion in the room. She turned slightly toward the audience, her unseeing gaze seeming to encompass everyone present. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice trembling with gratitude. "This town has given me more than I ever expected. A family, a purpose, and a place where I truly belong. I will carry your kindness with me wherever I go." As the applause continued, Ethan stepped forward, holding up a bouquet of flowers he had picked earlier that day. Walking onto the stage, he handed them to Clara with a sheepish grin. "For you," he said softly, "because you deserve every bit of happiness in the world." Clara accepted the bouquet with a radiant smile, hugging it close to her chest. "Thank you, Ethan," she replied. "Not just for these, but for everything. You've taught me that even the hardest hearts can change, and that gives me hope for the future." In the weeks that followed Clara's departure, the town felt different. There was a void left by her absence, but also a lingering warmth, a reminder of the impact she had made. Ethan threw himself into continuing the initiatives they had started together, determined to honor her legacy. Under his leadership, the community rallied to expand accessibility programs, organize inclusive events, and foster a culture of empathy and acceptance. Meanwhile, Clara thrived at the conservatory, quickly earning a reputation as one of its most promising students. Though her schedule was demanding, she stayed connected with Ethan and the others back home, exchanging letters and occasional video calls. Their conversations were filled with laughter, advice, and updates about their respective journeys. To Ethan's delight, Clara often included recordings of her latest compositions, each one infused with the same passion and soul that had captivated audiences in their small town. Years passed, and both Clara and Ethan grew into adults who embodied the values they had cultivated during their time together. Clara became a renowned musician, using her platform to advocate for disability rights and inspire young artists. Ethan, meanwhile, pursued a career in education, focusing on creating inclusive learning environments for students of all abilities. Despite the distance between them, they remained close, bound by the shared history that had shaped them. On a crisp autumn evening several years later, Clara returned to her hometown for a special performance. The event was billed as a celebration of community spirit, with proceeds going toward building a state-of-the-art sensory-friendly arts center. As she walked onto the familiar stage, greeted by thunderous applause, Clara scanned the audience with a smile. And there, standing near the front, was Ethan, clapping harder than anyone else. After the concert, as Clara mingled with well-wishers, Ethan approached her with a proud grin. "You haven't lost your touch," he teased. "If anything, you've gotten even better." Clara laughed, pulling him into a tight hug. "And you've turned into quite the advocate," she said warmly. "I'm so proud of everything you've done." As they stood there, surrounded by friends and loved ones, it was clear that their story wasn't just about overcoming adversity or forging unlikely friendships. It was about the transformative power of compassion, forgiveness, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to shine. Together, they had shown that even in the darkest moments, light could emerge, and that sometimes all it took was a single song to change the world.